Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another exciting, informative, and educational Yankee Air Museum Historic Presentation Night. Again, this month, I'm Jeff Bush, your host for the evening. I want to welcome everybody tonight. For those in attendance who are not Yankee members, why not? How many non-members do we have? Oh, crikeys, you know, we got a lot of them here, you know. This is really kind of good. We can get that, we can make that change. You know, if you were to purchase a membership and come to 7 of these events in a year, you would pay for that membership. Plus, you'd have all the other benefits that come along with the membership. Individual membership is $65 a year. How can you go wrong? So, this is one of the many benefits that you do by having a membership. However, even for the members, we do ask for donations at the end to assist us in bringing these great events in from around the country. We got a box on the table over here. We've got another one out on the table outside the door. $5 donation from each member would help us to keep these programs coming in. As far as upcoming events, as always, please check the website, www.yankeeairmuseum.org, and watch for updates and information on any upcoming events. Next summer, it's going to be kind of exciting air show-wise. In addition to our 25th annual Thunder Over Michigan on August 12th and 13th, we are going to be putting on and sponsoring an air show in Muskegon. July 6th and 7th, we will have 4 of our flyable airplanes over there doing airplane rides. And the 8th and the 9th, we're going to do an air show. Muskegon has been waiting for a long time to repeat their air show. Their last Muskegon Air Fair was in 2006, and they had many prior to that. So Muskegon is really geeked, and we are just happy that we can move in there and help them out and make their air show a success. So watch the website for those details, and we'll be getting more events on the site as we can see them, or as we get them, so you can see them. So now we'd like to ask you to turn all your cell phones off or to stun. Should probably pay attention to that too. Doesn't go off anyway. And please hold your any questions you have to the Q&A session at the end. Between the B-24s built here at historic Willow Run Airport in the early 40s and the Boeing 727, 737s, Douglas DC-9, and McDonnell Douglas MD-80 series aircraft flying here today, there have been a multitude of other aircraft in between. Tonight we will learn about and see a pictorial history of aircraft serving Willow Run. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Tom Livesey.
Thank you. You're supposed to take that.
I will. I had one thing to do.
Yeah, I got many. Well, good evening, and thanks for coming out to hear me talk about Willow Run. It's been kind of a passion thing for me. I spent 12 years here flying. Started my airline career here in 1988 till about 2000. And also I've always been big into airplanes and airlines and photography, so that's part of my interest for sharing a history of Willow Run. Anyway, without that, we'll get going here. Oh, yeah, Jeff, you were supposed to do that.
That's two things. I can remember one. I just couldn't remember which one I was supposed to remember.
Everybody can see that all right? Okay. And everybody can hear me okay? All right, cool. All right, anyway, there's a lot of history here at Willow Run in the past 80 years. Pretty much it started right before World War II. And Henry Ford owned this area. It was a farmland, and he had a farm for young men and to better their lives, trying to some kind of bring up some work ethic. In the spring of 1941, the United States Army Air Force approached Ford to build Willow Run and to build the B-24 Liberator for World War II. That hadn't really started, but they knew that, you know, things were happening in Germany and Europe and Asia. Ford was not amused at first. He was very opposed to being in the war, but driven by pride, profit, or patriotism, he started to build the bomber plant and then the aircraft, and he was convinced that he could do it better than anyone else. The airport was designed by a famous architect, Alfred Kahn. And they built one of the biggest and most efficient plants ever created. And there were 6 runways here, 1,650 acres, and the longest being 7,280 feet. And this is the second freeway ever constructed in the United States, built from Detroit to Willow Run, to ease the traffic into and out of the plant, which employed over 42,000 people at one time. And they had a hard time finding local workers, so they brought in people from way far away as Kentucky and Tennessee, and housing was an issue. So the Federal Housing Administration got involved, and they built Willow Run Village to accommodate 20,000 workers. The last B-24 rolled out of Willow Run on June 29, 1945. They built 8,685 of these airplanes here at Willow Run. At the end of the war, the federal government sold Willow Run to the University of Michigan, which used it for aeronautical research. It was also envisioned that Willow Run would become the main airport for Detroit. At that time, Detroit City Airport was the primary facility serving Detroit and Southeast Michigan. So airline traffic began coming to Willow Run in 1947, and this is one of the first flights. Pennsylvania Central Airlines, which became Capital Airlines, which became the modern-day United Airlines. Also, another early prop airplane from the 40s and 50s, American Airlines Convair 240. And this was a picture of the inside of the terminal, which they converted one of the bomber plant wings. Airline, like I said, airline traffic moved from, let me go back one here, just to touch on the terminal. City Airport during 1947, so they had 11 airlines here. Allegheny, American, Capital, Delta Eastern, Lake Central, Mohawk, North Central, Northwest, TWA, and United. In 1957, this airport was ranked the 7th busiest in the country with over 200,000 movements and 3 million passengers served by 11 airlines using the airport. Anyone here ever used this airport when they were younger? So,
My
yeah.
aunt flew it around here.
Wow. So you maybe remember it when you were
I remember.
younger. Okay. In the fall of 1958, they built a hotel with 20 rooms. It was on the mezzanine level. And also, there was a catering service, or the famous Al Green's restaurant. If anyone, I guess that was a very famous restaurant in the Detroit area. He catered all the airlines serving Willow Run with in-flight meals. He prepared 1,500 in-flight meals a day, or maybe a month. Maybe it was a month, I'm sorry. Oh no, it was a day. 1,500 in-flight meals, more than 100 gallons of coffee, and for the 60 daily flights departing Willow Run. So pretty busy. And this is a picture of the terminal, and then if I scroll through it, I can show you different parts of it. So they had the passenger terminal inside the bomber wing in the parking lot. And that's where the ground transportation pulled up to in front. I'll have some more pictures of that in a moment. And there was an observation deck. And there was concourse, the blue concourse. And there was the red concourse. And then I got all the different airlines that served different parts of the concourses here. So it was a pretty busy airport. Now here's a shot of a United either DC-4 or DC-6. That's the observation deck. And that's the front building where the entrance is, and parking lot. You can still faintly see that sign if you go out and hit it the right time of day, the right light. You can, very faint. And then transportation service. And Willow Run was kind of isolated because, you know, Detroit downtown is quite far from here. So a man named Warren Avis began the first ever car rental service at Willow Run. And we all know the Avis name, it's pretty well known. And this is a picture from summer of 1953 showing Northwest Airlines and Capital. But that's 3 Boeing Stratocruisers. Those were pretty big airplanes that they could serve. I don't know where they went. Couldn't find any schedules, but they probably went to New York or Minneapolis, and maybe on to Seattle, and maybe on to the Orient. Here's an Eastern Constellation from 1957. They served Miami and New York from here, I believe. Also, if you see on the far right corner of the picture, there's a Boeing 707 TWA. TWA was the first jet airline service at Willow Run, April 1st, 1960. They went from here to St. Louis to Los Angeles. And you can see it on the time schedule here, somewhere down here where it says Willow Run, if you can see it, it'll say Detroit. But it shows the flight with the service where they went. It was once a day, and then it would come back from Los Angeles. United was also big here, and I found these photos to include, and it actually shows the flight 744 in there, I believe, in the window. And this nice lady's getting on this airplane, and this airplane is going to Philadelphia, nonstop from Detroit. Yeah. And that's the schedule showing the United service out of here. And then United had a DC-8 service to Chicago. So there was 3 or 4 airlines that operated jets into here. In addition, and this was right early 60s where the props are kind of transitioning out and the jet airplanes are coming in. And United had 727 service here, and they were the last jet operator out of here in 1966. And because of Willow Run's distant location, the airlines started migrating to Detroit Metro beginning in 1958. Delta left to go in 1959, TWA 1963, Eastern Mohawk Lake Central by 1966. But by the time 1966 came, no more passenger service at Willow Run. So it kind of transitioned to a cargo airport. And there was a lot of business in the area because we live in an automotive building region and stuff needs to be moved. And it became the inventory control for Ford, Chrysler, and GM. Over 50 tons of air freight would be moved annually on every size of aircraft, from Cessna 310 to a Boeing 747. The joke was if it fit through the door, it went by air. But behind the scenes, it was total chaos for the automakers because it was, you know, just-in-time inventory control. And that's why Willow Run did so well, because there would be a box of bolts, a wiring harness, a windshield. And you can't shut down a plant that's $1 million per hour. You can rent an airplane for $20,000 or $30,000 and, you know, save your inventory control. And there were plenty of stories and follies along the way at YIP, which boasted oil cover ramps of old prop liners discarded long ago by the passenger carriers. And then finally some of the early jets, DC-8, DC-9, 727s, and 747s. Now, many of the cargo airlines, all these airlines served Willow Run, but the ones in red highlighted are the 6 big ones I wanted to highlight individually. I call them the Big Six. They were the majority of the carriers at Willow Run. So we'll start with Active Aero. They're still here on the field, and they were founded in 1979 to operate on-demand quick delivery air charters. And they have become one of the largest aircraft brokers in the country. They charter all different airlines, cargo airlines. So if they get a job they can't handle with their airplanes, they'll call somebody that can, and they'll be the broker. And they have a fleet of Falcons. And then they also have DC-9s that started as USA Jet in 1994. Then USA Jet and Active Aero merged in the late 90s. And now they're all one airline here. And this is a couple different pictures of their airline, their DC-9s. They still operate the DC-915, the little short one that's hasn't been in airline service for many, many years, but it's still a good little freighter. They also have 2 or 3 727s they use for cargo. But they also are the launch customer for MD-80 cargo conversion. They have the converted passenger MD-80 passenger airplanes to cargo. So they're the ones that do that. They're currently owned by the Ascent Group. It's a limited liability group. And they're the holding company for USA Jet. Now they did do passenger work for a while. They did sports teams and stuff like that, but they ended that in 2012. But they're still here at Willow Run. You see them a lot here. The next big one is Connie Coletta. I mean, Connie has a long reputation here. He's been here a long time. And he was quite large here up until 2000 when things went sour with the Kitty Hawk merger. But he started back in 1967 with a couple Cessna 310s. Rumor is he won them in a poker game. Who knows? But he even was a pilot, and he actually went to Ford and brokered deals to move cargo. And he quickly started buying Beech 18s and Lear 23s. And then in 1984, he purchased an airline called Jetways that had DC-6s and DC-8 jets. So now this gave him some flexibility to expand, and he actually operated those jets. And he actually had his own DC-8 jet in the mid-80s. And I think he ran into some trouble with the FAA at some point. I don't know the whole story, but that one had to go away. And then he started back with 727s, and he had he did some work for Flying Tigers when they had a cargo airline. He flew them, but they were painted in Flying Tigers colors. Then he had some DC-9s. It was all for automotive work. And he got into the DC-8s. He also had, he bought the old DC-8s for parts, so there's one that's kind of, I don't think it's going to fly, but maybe there's something he can use out of it. So, anyway, I actually worked for them from 1990 to 2000. I flew the DC-8 and the 747. It was a fun job. Learned a lot about flying airplanes. He also had one DC-873, which is the one with the big engines. That airplane was owned by Anand Khashoggi, the famous gun runner. Supposedly the gold fixture bathroom was sitting in the hangar somewhere. So, we also did work for Bax Global. We actually flew the airplanes, but they were owned by Bax Global. They flew out of Toledo, all over the United States serving cargo. It's kind of like a small UPS type overnight operation. This is the American International ramp. He got that in the mid-90s after Xantop gave up their hub. There's another one of his, and he rebranded American International Airways instead of Coletta Air. He also did some postal work at one point and had an airplane painted in postal colors. And this is a picture from the merger when it became Kitty Hawk. But Um, Coletta flew the most, or the second most, flights during Desert Storm in 1991, behind FedEx. And the monies that he generated during that allowed for expansion in the mid-90s of his airline. So he bought the L-1011 freighter. He was the first airline to operate the freighter version of the L-1011. He also had a couple passenger ones. And he also bought 4 747s from Japan, 2 cargo and 2 passenger. So his airline really started to rapidly grow. When I was there, we had over 1,000 pilots in the late 90s. And he was really good about, always wanted to do things internally. He had his own engine shop, he had his own hangar up at Oscoda that he got at one point, engine shop. He tried to do everything in-house. You know, he just thought, if I take care of it, it'll be better done than if I take it outside and have somebody do it. Well, unfortunately, by 97, his airline was quite big, and he carried a lot of debt. So Kitty Hawk came in and said, well, we'll buy you. And so in 1998, we became part of Kitty Hawk, and we were Kitty Hawk International now. We were a subsidiary of Kitty Hawk. And we were flying these 747s for, this one particularly was used for a Ford Motor Company run. We flew engine blocks from Canada. They would be trucked over to Willow Run, and we flew them to Birmingham, England, and then we would fly back transmissions for the Ford Explorer. And it was a pretty big operation. I mean, we were one of the largest cargo carriers in the late 90s, 1998. That one there particularly, he did a contract. We went to Africa and flew. So that was the airline we flew for in Africa. So by 1999, he suspended the passenger operations, but he kept all the freighters, or at least Kitty Hawk suspended the passenger operations. And airplanes started being rebranded in Kitty Hawk International colors, not the traditional gold and red Coletta. But some of them just got retitled. He also did a lot of movie stints. That one is supposed to be showing that there's some kind of explosion on the side of the airplane for a movie. And there was Air Force One with Harrison Ford. Coletta used, that was one of his 747s. Unfortunately, by the end of April of 2000, Kitty Hawk International was no more. It was completely shut down at the end of April. I flew one of the last flights, took one of the 747s to the desert. And to be honest, Connie was not happy with what happened. I mean, he lost his baby. So over the summer of 2000, he was able to negotiate with the bankruptcy court to start Coletta Air in November of 2000 with 3 747s. And he built it back up. And today he has a fleet of over 30 airplanes, 747-400s. He's got 777s, and he's got a couple 767s which are being phased out. But he is the launch customer for the brand new passenger converted 777, and he'll be getting those in February of 2023. So Connie has done well. He's a fighter. He doesn't give up. So we'll move on to another carrier that was here, Rosenbaum. They were established in 1998, and they had some DC-6s and some DC-8s. And then they also had some C-46 freighters as well, early on. And they got involved flying for Emory in the mid-80s. And so they started flying all the flights for Emory. Emory was a cargo carrier out of Dayton. They didn't have their own airline, so Rosenbaum was the carrier that flew for them and provided pilots and maintenance and all that. So all their airplanes that they flew were painted red like Emory. They also did work for Bax Global as well. But as time went on, Emory decided to get their own airline, And by late 1990, Emery Worldwide they terminated their contract with Rosenbaum. And so Rosenbaum tried to start up his own carrier called Flagship Express, but that didn't go any further than into early 1992, and they went bankrupt. So they're no longer around. But they were here for many, many years at Willow Run. So Dwayne's in the audience. Can you, anything about this, what happened? This is a Rosenbaum airplane, and that's Dwayne Sr. and Dwayne Jr. And they're laughing, obviously, because it's not their airplane. But what happened?
The ramp wars, and somebody didn't put the pin in and pulled the lever, and down it went. And,
so it was done on purpose?
No.
Oh, it was a mistake. Okay.
It was a mistake, and so my dad started laughing. I couldn't stop laughing.
I could see that. I don't know if you sent me that picture, but I have that in my collection. I just think that's hilarious. That's a little tidbit from Willow Run Follies, I call it. So, anyway, on to the next one. Transcontinental was another big airline here, and it was started in 1972 by Dean Melvin as a flight training academy called International Airlines Academy. And he had a fleet of C-46 freighters, and then he got into some DC-6s, and then he had some Convair 340s and 440s. But he had one Electra. He never flew it. He sold it to Evergreen. So it was painted in full colors. It was supposed to come here and operate as a freighter, but I guess it was better to sell it, so he must have made money on the deal. But that was taken in Van Nuys. A guy that I flew with at Transcon years ago gave me that picture of that airplane. So that's very rare. It was never seen here at Willow Run. But they had a fleet of Convair's, and that's the airplane I started on in 1988, and we flew all over the place. We went as far west as El Paso, and all far south as Louisiana, and all up and down the East Coast. It was a pretty cool airplane to fly. But he also got into jets. In 1987, he bought 3 of the United freighters, because United was getting out of the freight business. So Transcon got DC-8s, so they were doing well. They started flying for Xantop, because Xantop had scaled back on their DC-8 operations, so they needed DC-8s to fly the hub for the freight out of Willow Run before Connie had bought it. So we used to go to LA, Dallas, New York, Memphis. They also rebranded their name, a little bit modern scheme. This is a training flight. I was out one day watching, taking pictures, and they're out doing touch and goes, because a lot of times, like today's airline simulators, you know, they can do everything pretty much in the airplane or in the simulator. But some of the simulators were older. You'd actually do your landings and takeoffs in a real airplane. So you get 4 or 5 of you would go out, check airmen, and everybody would get 3 landings, and you'd be good to go. So that's what was going on there. They also got into the passenger business, and were doing charters in '89 into '90. Unfortunately, they grew a bit too fast and got in over their head, and they filed for bankruptcy in the fall of 1990. So that was my first furlough. There's a few more. There's a few more after that. Anyway, Xantop is actually probably the most colorful history, I think. They've started way back in the late 40s. 4 brothers, Dwayne's dad, Dwayne Sr. There was Elroy, Howard, and Lloyd, and Dwayne. And they began general aviation services and air taxi and ad hoc cargo flights out of Jackson, Michigan. And they started with this little, which I don't really know what the name of it is, but everybody calls it the Bamboo Bomber. So they started with those. Then they got into C-46s and DC-6s. In 1952, they applied for and received an airline operating certificate after major car makers recommended more air cargo flights. And that's when it became Xantop Air Transport. And they actually operated out of Detroit Metro for a while. They also, in 1962, received supplemental status from the Civil Aeronautics Board to do common carriage, and that's where they started the hub here at Willow Run, where they had these flights all over the place. And they also got involved with the government doing log air, where they do cargo flights for the military between bases. But in 1966, they sold out to an airline called Universal. So Universal took over, and they had a bunch of, this is an Argosy, it's a British-built job, but this was a freighter. Universal had over 100 aircraft in their fleet. And they had a bunch of C-46s. Here's Willow Run. It's probably a cargo sort of some sort. And they were flying all over the place, Mexico, Canada, overseas, because they also bought brand new DC-8s from Douglas, and they acquired DC-8s from purchasing American Flyers Aviation in 1970. Here's their rebranded scheme in the late 69, 1970. But they were big at Willow Run. I mean, they had lots of different airplanes. There's one gentleman in the audience that I'm familiar with that actually worked for them and was a mechanic, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you recognize some of these airplanes.
And that was an AW650, that British one.
Yeah, isn't it Argosy?
Yeah.
That's what they call it, yeah. Whistle, really loud white whine, I guess. So they had Electras, they had DC-6s, they had DC-7s, they had DC-8s. They were doing well, they had all these airplanes, and then boom. Economy got bad. The CEO of the board, Lamar Muse, Muse Air, Southwest Airlines future, he wanted to buy a couple 747s. And the people on the board said, nah, not a good idea. These airplanes never flew for Universal. They were never painted, but they were supposed to get two 747 freighters at one point. Or maybe they were passenger. Rick, were they passenger?
Passenger.
They were going to be passenger, okay. So they suddenly went bankrupt in 1971. They're gone. So Zantop gets back in the picture. The family buys the business back, and they rename it Zantop International. So they start again. DC-6s. And they have Convair 640 fleet. That one looked like Hawaiian Airlines. That's the old Hawaiian Airlines scheme. And they started buying. Well, this one here is kind of the advertisement of what they put inside the airplane, which I thought was kind of cute. But they also buy a bunch of Electras. They start buying Lockheed Electras, and they have a huge fleet of Electras. I think they were one of the largest Electra operators at one time. Is that right, Rick? You worked for them.
Yeah. I think they had 24.
Wow. 25? That would be about, yep. So by 1981, the Zantop fleet consisted of 6 DC-8s, 25 Electras, 12 DC-6s, and 14 Convair 640s. And this is the whole, you can see they're unloading, loading. This is the Willow Run hub. You know, a bunch of airplanes, where things are going all over the country. And later, they actually contracted out their Electras to fly overseas in England, and then they went up to Alaska with Linden Air Cargo. And this is in the mid 90s, no, early. When was Linden, Rick?
Probably around
91, 92?
96.
Okay. Well, let me back up just a bit. I got a little ahead of myself. I'm sorry. 1988, economic downturn. They sold off all their DC-8s. So they just went back to Electras. And by 1993, they sold the hub to Connie Coletta, American International Freight. And then by early 2000, they actually turned in the certificate, and Zantop was gone. But they were here for a long time. Here's one of their early DC-8s when the hub was here in the late 80s. No, I don't believe so. Those were some of the old Transcon airplanes. See, there's one of the Transcon airplanes that was flying for Xantop, and that was in the early 90s. That's a picture of the trucks waiting to get in to deliver the cargo to the airplanes on a stormy winter day. And that was the dispatch board where all the flights were dispatched out of. Everything was done by hand. It's not electronic like it is today. And here's a picture of the hub at night with all the airplanes where they're doing the sort. So then I thought I would highlight just quickly the other airlines that served Willow Run that weren't the big main carriers. And there's quite all the ones in red there. So I just go through and I got some pictures of most of them. I tried to highlight them. So Amerijet, they are still around. They have Boeing 767s now. They operate out of Miami a lot, but they used to come in here. They might still come in here on ad hoc cargo flights. Ameristar is another one. I think they have a couple of DC-9s or 737s these days. I've seen them around. ATI used to be here. That originally was called Interstate, but then it became Air Transport International. And they did a lot of work for Burlington Air Cargo out of Toledo. They did a lot of work for UPS before UPS got their certificate. A lot of little carriers. A guy with 2 or 3 Learjets, just so he could move a box of bolts. So, Champion Air was in here with ad hoc, but Connie Coletta actually bought Champion Air and acquired those airplanes in the mid-90s, 95. And you get some special things in here once in a while. I don't even know if that company is around anymore, but that's a Boeing Stratocruiser that's been modified to carry airplane parts and big machinery. The tail opens up. Evergreen was here with their Electra. Emery, the old, which is now this might have been operated by Rosenbaum. I couldn't figure out who operated it. It's possible, but Emery, they were the big cargo carrier out of Dayton, so they were in here. ExpressNet, after Transcontinental went away, it was owned by Connie Coletta as a secondary certificate, and then that certificate became ExpressNet, and they had a fleet of A300s. They operated in the late 90s into early 2000, I believe. But they're no longer around either. They did a lot of work for Emery. Somebody's DC-6, I don't know who operated that one, but something at Willow Run. Fleming was a big Electra operator. They used to come in here. They're no longer around. Galaxy was another operator of Electras. They were here cargoing. Hawaiian Air was here. They had a cargo operation for a long time. When they ended up selling all their Electras to Xantop. That's how Xantop got more Electras. And then Kitty Hawk was here. Before it was merged with Coletta, they had their own airplanes. And they had 727. The biggest thing they ever had was 727-200 before they got till they bought Coletta. So, and then of course we talked about Linden earlier with the Electras, but Linden brings their L100 freighters in here as well. I haven't seen them in here lately, but they've been around. Do they? A couple times. This was a carrier that was around back in the late 70s, maybe to the early 80s. I don't know a lot about them. They had Beech 18s and DC-3s and a couple other type of airplanes. And they did a lot of automotive charters. Of course, Murray Aviation was here for a long time. And they started out with little turboprop airplanes. I think that's an MU-2 if I'm not mistaken. And then they got into DC-8s, and then they have, I believe they still have a couple 757, 767. They also have a couple 747 freighters too. So they're out in the industry for ad hoc wide body cargo. And Northern Air Cargo out of Alaska, they've been down here doing charters. They have 737s now, I believe, 737 freighters. And there was another place called Petroleum Air, they called it Pat Air. They were here at Willow Run, in and out for a long time, carrying ad hoc cargo. And this is the actual DC-4, or C-54, Piedmont Air Transport. You don't see too many DC-4s around anymore. And then, of course, Reliant was here, and they could be considered one of the other big ones because they were run by one of the Zantop nephews, Reese Zantop, and he bought the Falcons. That when FedEx had Falcons, they started getting bigger airplanes. They sold off their Falcons, and Reliant bought a whole fleet of Falcons. And then they actually got into DC-9s, and I believe they actually had a crew base in Memphis because they did a lot of work for FedEx last minute. You know, if they needed some lift. And Rhodes, that was before Kitty Hawk. They became part of Kitty Hawk. Rich International was a DC operator out of Miami. They used to come up here, do ad hoc charters. And Saturn, after Universal went out of business, Saturn purchased all the Universal Electras. So they had a base here and had flying out of here, cargo out of Willow Run. Excuse me. And of course, Southern Air Transport, they were around. Who knows what they were doing? They were always a little on the shady side.
CIA.
And Span East was another carrier, and these were the ex-Universal DC-6s. Span East got these. I couldn't find any pictures of any of them ever taken at Willow Run, but that one was actually taken in Miami. But they used to fly out of Willow Run as well. And there was Transair Link. And they ended up doing a lot of cargo work for Zantop, because Zantop got rid of their DC-6s and Transair Link took it over for them on contract. And that was the other transcontinental after the transcontinental I worked for. That was the one that Scott let his son run and oversee before it was ExpressNet. And then there's this Mexican carrier that I see here a lot. There's actually an MD-80 cargo freighter on the ramp, or at least there was a couple weeks ago. And they come in, they charters from Mexico, because there's still a lot of automotive business between here and some of the Ford plants and stuff down in Mexico. Is it? Okay. And then there was another Universal, not to be confused with the Zantop Universal that was on this side of the field. That was actually my first job here. That lasted 3 weeks. They were going to add like Convair's to the certificate, and the guy got mad and shut the whole thing down. So, but that was who I was supposed to come to work for in the summer of '88. But it didn't work out. But they were around for a while, and they had a bunch of DC-6s also. So, and a car, you get an occasional weird freighter Carver. That's a converted DC-4, a Carvair. And then we've had some miscellaneous stuff over the years. Air Force One's been in here when George Bush spoke at University of Michigan commencement. And nobody seemed to bother me wanting to take pictures, so I thought, well, okay, fine. Good opportunity. And you occasionally get sky cranes in here because you'll see they'll try to replace air conditioning units in downtown Ann Arbor. So they'll need something to carry those heavy units off the roof. And Domino's Pizza had a Convair at it for a while. It was a corporate airplane when they were still headquartered here. I don't know what kind of airplanes they have now. And then ERIM was here for a while, Environmental Research in Michigan. They had a couple different airplanes, Convair and a Caribou. The Goodyear blimp used to come here. I don't know if it does anymore when the Michigan football games. So you get that. And this one is a mystery. This is an airline called Baltic Air that Connie supposedly was involved with. Sold them the airplane. This airplane sat here at Willow Run for over 2 years, and the airline never started, right? They never flew, right?
They couldn't pass the video.
Oh, they couldn't pass their evacuation thing. Okay. So it was here. I mean, you'd see it at one part of the airport, then it'd be over at the other side, and finally it just went away one day. It just disappeared. But it was here a lot, wasn't it, Rick?
It was good for shade at the air
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and I think that was it at the air show. So.
I thought it did a flying pass at one of Thunder's also.
I don't think it flew. I never saw it fly. It never flew. It never flew. It never flew. Yeah, and that was it. Eastern's been in here. They're a new charter airline. They got a bunch of different airplanes, but that's taken a couple years back. So, in closing, Willow Run was, and to some extent, still today, truly a hub for Middle America, serving the big three automakers to prevent production lines from shutting down. It was common for a Boeing 747 to fly from Willow Run to Kansas City full of auto parts, or fly nonstop to the United Kingdom, or serve auto plants in Europe, and serve auto plants in Europe. Nor was it uncommon to see a Learjet 23 depart to Los Angeles with 3 wiring bundles in order to prevent a major shutdown of a California auto plant. Willow Run learned to adapt over the years to meet the customer's needs. And these days, the airport is somewhat quiet, but automotive charter flights still occur, just not at the same pace as in the 1960s through early 2000. And for me, it was the start of my career. There's some fond memories here of flying and working, and I was a little younger then, but that's when I was brand new on the Convair in 1988. And that was me on the 747 in 1998. I was the youngest guy in the crew. Those guys were a lot older than I was. I was 36 or 37 then. So, but I really learned a lot about flying out of here, and I flew with some really great pilots. They knew how to fly. So I picked up their trade, or picked up their skills. And before 9/11, my kids used to get to come out. 2 of my daughters. Sarah is in the red and Emma on the far right. They're all now young adults. But they used to come meet me when I would come in on a flight. And that was cool. Until unfortunately the fences went up and can't really do that much anymore. So, but good memories of Willow Run for me. I always like to thank the people that help me get the photos together, because I can't find everything, but I had a lot of help from people that have photos, and special thank you to all of you that helped. And if you're really burning desire, you just can't get enough of my talk, I just finished an article in the November issue of Airways. It pretty much summarizes what I've talked about tonight, but I am actually going to see if the gift shop can get a stack, and they're going to sell them. But if you see it out on the newsstands, there's an article about Willow Run. Any questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
I was surprised at all the prop planes.
Well, back in the 70s, and even early 80s, there was a lot of prop airplanes here, because a lot of the passenger carriers got rid of their prop, and they all became freighters. There was a lot of prop airplanes at one time, and a lot of activity. It was not so much anymore. They're pretty much all gone. You don't even see them in Miami anymore, because Miami used to be a big prop for cargo. They've pretty much gone by the wayside. Yes, ma'am.
You assume that probably a lot of this freight will be transferred from plane to truck to go to plants.
Yes.
I worked for the Henry Ford as a presenter at the Rouge truck tour, and I was at the bus greeter stand. Because the road projects are such a screwed up mess that truckers are always coming around our entrance. It was a chopper.
Oh.
Do they
Well,
transfer?
it is,
people
well,
to choppers?
it was not uncommon for a helicopter to land on the front lawn of a plant to deliver a box of stuff if the plant was going to be shut down. That was, and I forgot to mention that. But that has happened, that a helicopter would land by the plant with parts or whatever that was needed to keep the plant in production.
So they wouldn't come in here to transfer some hot parts?
They might land here and then take it right to the front lawn of the plant, depending on the situation.
Yeah.
So, as I stated earlier,
Looked to be like it had maybe 8 passenger,
I-
not counting.
well, maybe it was a executive, but I mean, I know that it's at some point back in the day, when plants were running and there was issues, there was actual helicopters that would land to deliver parts. That was done if it was like an extreme emergency.
We don't wanna shut that.
No, you never want to shut the plant down. Now, that's why all this happened. This is why Willow Run was so big and busy, and there was so many carriers here for so long. Now things have changed to the point where it's a lot more. I mean, I think UPS and FedEx do a lot of the logistics, and there's a lot more trucking, and it's gotten more refined. So there's probably not a huge need for all these airplanes anymore, like there was in the 70s, 60s, and 70s into the 80s. But I mean, that's why Willow Run was here, and it was so busy, and that's why there was so many different airlines here, because there was just so much business to move. Because and also you had automobile plants out west, California, you know, but things have all scaled back. I mean, a lot of plants have closed, so things are much different than they were back in the 70s and 80s. Yes, sir.
How much work is it to convert passenger aircraft to freight?
I don't really know. Rick, you're with, you know?
Quite a bit, they gotta beef up the floor, they gotta cut
I do know there's something called an STC, a supplemental type certificate, and Connie Coletta got one for the L1011. So he owned that STC. So he was the main person that would convert L1011 freighter, passenger freighter. USA Jet, the one I showed earlier, they have converted MD-80 passenger, so they own that STC. So I don't think anyone else could do. They have to go through those carriers if somebody wants to get an airplane. And it could take 6 months to a year to convert an airplane. Now I know Coletta with the new 777-300 passenger freighter or passenger converted freighter, he's the launch customer. I read about that like 2.5 years ago, and I think he's maybe getting the first one in February of next year. So 2 or 3 year project, because like Rick said, floors have to be beefed up, have to change some things around, because they weren't originally designed as freighters. Now I work at UPS, and we have 767s and 757s that we actually went to Boeing and said, build us a freighter, and everything was built up, beefed up when it was delivered. We don't have many that are converted. They were actual built as freighters for us. So they've got they were designed to be freighters right from the get-go. Yes, Dwayne?
Yeah, we did a lot of, we did Khashoggi's airplane for Coletta down in Macon.
Well, I showed that picture of the freighter.
We converted that, we converted a lot of DC-8s for other airlines down in Macon, for our competitors actually.
Yeah.
And then we converted Converse 640s and Electras, we put those in passenger airplanes.
You must have had the STC then for the Converse 640.
Boeing has 5 lines throughout the world converting some 37 freighters.
Wow.
So it's a big business.
Oh yeah, well no, that's the growing, you know, there's going to be a lot of conversions coming up. Boeing's forecast is a lot of passenger airplanes to be converted. There's a big outfit in Israel. I think that's who Coletta's working with.
Yeah.
Bob, I saw your hand up. Yes, sir, Dave.
Well, just an example of the JIT, there was a company in Ypsilanti called Superior Coatings, and they would have they would get a truckload of tie rod ends delivered, and they would put it on their paint line, while the truck waited and paint them, and that truck would come, load back on the truck, and it'd come out here. So it was just a tie rod end, and that was all JIT stuff. And that's all that company did was JIT paint jobs for automotive.
Yeah. When I started my career flying, we didn't really have a schedule. I had a pager. They would just call you when they needed you because they never knew. They would get a phone call from one of the big three. Hey, we need you to move. Go to Nashville and pick up parts and bring them back to Detroit, or go to Flint. And I mean, you just didn't know. I guess that's where all these companies all had traffic departments where they figured out how to move all their cargo or move all their parts they needed. So it was a big business. It was a big deal. The airlines here made a lot of money flying automotive parts.
Besides automotive, some of the stuff that came through here when I was here, my tenure, I got a call from AOG to try and procure some parts for Falcon
mean, when I flew at Coletta, we flew a tiger to the New York Zoo one day. I remember that. I mean, we flew all kinds of stuff. I do remember we used to fly rats, and they were in the belly. They stunk. The smell was horrible. They had this sweet smell.
What would you fly rats for?
A laboratory? They're going somewhere for testing or something? Who knows? Yes, Dwayne? Oh, yeah, yeah. Hey, like I said, if it fit through the door, it went, you know? So, I mean, I remember one flight I did. I went to Lansing to Grand Rapids to Detroit in a DC-8 61, big stretch, because it was all automotive stuff. We took 747s to Kansas City all the time to go pick up stuff. So, I mean, UPS today, they run 747s round trip from Louisville to Dallas, Louisville, Minneapolis, Louisville, New York. Short runs because they can carry so much in one flight. So it doesn't matter, you know, like the 767 I fly at UPS. We fly at 1 hour, we fly at 10 hours. It does all sorts of legs. It's very versatile. So. Yes, sir.
I signed a lot of authorizations for charters at Ford, so I'm familiar with what goes on. I can remember Universal having a big display out here at one of the air shows. They had designs, I think, on buying a C5 Galaxy.
Yes, that is correct.
And flying automobiles around.
They were looking, because when the C5 Galaxy came out, they were trying to market it as the L500, Lockheed L500, and some of the airlines were interested. And I did read that about Universal, but I couldn't find any pictures because I would have included it. Yeah, no, it was. It's kind of like the A380 freighter, big pipe dream. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the volatility of these bankruptcies and so on, a lot of these planes were the same planes just circulating around because if you went bankrupt, then whoever had the
Well,
capital could buy it for pennies on the dollar.
That is kind of correct what happened with the Universal thing. When they went under, some airplanes went to Saturn and some went to Span East, and I don't know where the DC-8s went to, maybe Transamerica or who? Trans-International got them. So yeah, you're right. There's, you know, and just because my interest in the taking pictures and the hobby of tracking airplanes, I've seen the same tail number show up in 7 or 8 different airlines over the years. They just trade them off to each other. So, yes, sir.
Two comments. As a kid, like many, I had an interest in aviation. When I was in 6th grade, we had a class trip, a field trip to Detroit Metro Airport to go on a Zen-top DC-3. It was a passenger aircraft, first airplane I was ever on. Just walked on, sat down, enjoyed it. That all came to pass because of a classmate by the name of Diane Zen-top.
Oh.
You little redhead, as I recall.
So, where's the relation, Dwayne? Your cousin. That's cool.
That was
That was my first.
So you actually had one passenger DC-3? Was it corporate?
Yeah, we did.
Oh.
We take the seats out.
Oh, I didn't know that. Very interesting.
That was my first exposure to aviation. Second comment, you mentioned Iram and showed a picture of their Condor 580. Prior to that, they had a C-47.
I did not know that.
They flew until 1982 when the Yankee Air Museum purchased it.
Ah.
Spent a year refurbishing it, taking it back to its military roots and look.
Oh.
And today I am a co-pilot on that C-47.
Oh, cool.
It's the most fun I've had in an airplane.
Yeah, whatever happened to the Caribou? They had a Caribou for a long time.
That I don't know.
Oh, okay. I don't even know what they did. Aerial research? Okay. Taking pictures and stuff? Okay. Yes, sir.
How big was Evergreen? Because they got a big air museum.
They got quite big. They had Lockheed Electras, they had 727s, DC-9s, DC-8s, they got into 747s. And then in the mid-90s, they really pared down and they went out of business. I think they were gone by 2000, early 2000s, but.
Have you been to that museum near Portland?
No, I have not, but I've heard of
They
it.
got 2 747s out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I think it's in McMinnville.
And
Yeah,
no
yeah,
or-
yeah.
Yeah, that's where the Spruce Goose is.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
a lot of space stuff too.
yeah. And that's the other thing, a lot of these cargo carriers have gone out of business. There's not nearly the number that was, the business has changed quite a bit, so.
Well, Evergreen owned and operated the 747 that shuttled the space shuttle. That was Evergreen that did that.
Well,
I got invited to a private event after hours out there one time. I walked in and Dal Smith says, "Thank you for coming to my museum." I said, "Mr. Smith, you don't have to thank me for coming to your museum."
So they flew that 747,
That
that
was their
silver,
contract.
oh, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
they shuttled the shuttle.
Wow,
That was their,
that's pretty
that was
cool.
their airplane.
That was an American Airlines 747 was converted to a freighter and then became part of the space shuttle program.
They had a lot of helicopters. They did line work too for checking power.
Yeah, they had two divisions, Evergreen Airlines, and they had all these small airplanes and helicopters, and then Evergreen International was their cargo subsidiary. Any more? Sir, Bob?
Yeah, does UPS have any new aircraft types on order?
We ordered some more 767s about 6 weeks ago. So no new types that I know of. They don't tell us anything. That's secret information. You know, they'll say, no, we're not going to do it, and then you'll read it in the paper the next day.
Not until it shows up on the ramp.
Yeah. We did just get our last Boeing 747-800-8 last year. So we got 28 of those. Those are nice airplanes. But as far as a new type, I don't know. The MD-11s they're starting to think about Parkinson because the Pratt Whitney engines are out of time and they don't want to spend the money on the C-check. So I think some of the MD-11s are going to start being parked eventually. So I don't know. We'll see. I won't be there. Anything else?
I'll be flying the C-47 here, right?
Yeah, I know. You keep it up, Dave. It'll happen. Well, thanks for having me. I enjoyed talking about. Thank you.
Well, we're at that part of the night again. Time has come to say goodnight. Anyway, just remember we have great programs like this every month, first Wednesday of every month. Our next program is going to be November 2nd. We will welcome Ms. Beverly Weintraub, who will present Wings of Gold. It's a story of the first women naval aviators. They selected 6 women to fly in the Navy, and they were expected to fail. That's all I'm going to say at this point. Please remember the donation box is off to the side and out in the hallway. They are hungry. Your support truly does go a long way to help us keep these programs going. Thanks to Becca Folsom for putting on this great program. Great job, Becca, as always. Thank you all for coming out tonight. And until next time, bye-bye and bye-bye. See ya.